Hello. Uh, as usual, I hope the mic and everything is clear. I'm wearing my mask. Excuse me, I'll just take it off. Uh, what I really wanted to be able to broach in some way today is something that a lot of people find difficulty in sharing. And really, it may be about the circumstances people find themselves in, uh, whether they are bound to some kinds of agreements regarding confidentiality, maybe with work, maybe with relationships, and for whatever reason they find that it isn't easy to circumvent, and they have to bottle something up to be able to uh, do what they require to do just for their living, whatever that may be. And yet, it's important to recognize that, however vital that job may be, it if it does interfere with your ability to express yourself, it will act as an impediment in your relations with the people close to you at some level, because I guess everyone can sense at some level when someone is being aloof or standoffish, or or when, for example, you may feel that I withhold something from you. uh, it's a natural observation that we make. Yet, to be more specific, what a lot of people find a lot harder to share is precisely moments of grief, because it requires that someone feel comfortable enough in a place to be able to share what they are not happy about. And I think that there is an extent to which we should encourage and uh, promote people who uh, publicly bring forth what it is that they may be uh, angsty about, what they may be upset about, what may have disappointed them. And I think it's only via sharing such moments in our lives that we get a sense of what may be happening uh, in each other's emotive worlds. And it's very easy to disconnect that from what we usually do in our day to day lives. So much so that a standoffish, quote unquote, professional demeanor may become the default prescription for how a society chooses to exist. And that really may not be the most conducive way to inculcate any kind of camaraderie, any kind of friendship, any kind of romantic relationships. And it just generally helps to be able to have to, or rather, be able to speak with someone without worrying about, oh, how am I going to break the ice? I mean, effectively, everyone is a stranger to each other. Nobody knows everyone in their entirety. And at some level, if we recognize this, maybe there would be less of an hang up regarding, oh, what the first impression may be, and how may I appear, unless, of course, you're in the business of appearances, in which case it would, I guess, in some ways, matter to you. All of that aside, I mean, we come across a variety of fronts, right? And I guess it's important to be able to recognize those, in the sense that there may be people who don't exactly perform in an advertisement, yet they represent an organization in as much as they peddle wares for that organization. These may be commodities, this may be uh, credit cards, this may be loans, these may be forms of education, these may be public services, such as those supposedly backed by the state. We are talking about healthcare, security, and so on and so forth. And very often, all of these professions have commitments tied to them. Commitments regarding, of course, what you do with your schedule, the actual work involved, whether it's attending to files, whether it's certain inspections, whether it's taking a class, and so on and so forth. And it's at some point simple to get into that regimen, to be able to do that day in and day out, and to compartmentalize your day into what it is that you do for a living, quote unquote, or basically what people mean by that is what they do to earn a wage, and the other part where they basically rest and recuperate and maybe spend time with family, maybe watch TV and stuff of that nature. Uh, Really, I mean, where you found yourself here effectively is a place where you are trying to implement a division in a way which cannot really be sustained. I mean, you would have to be able to uh, not necessarily share between these two spheres, but understand that it is literally you who moves between them, and it is impossible that there won't be some sort of carryover as you go about your day-to-day lives, making these visits to your workplace, or now that because of coronavirus, a lot of us are working from home. And I think initially when the lockdown first hit, a lot of people found themselves at home and they were unable to deal with what the situation might have been like. Just to find yourself confined to where you are, to be forced to confront the people that you live with, uh, and do what it is that you do for a living. I think being able to not necessarily manage them as much as to be able to be transparent to oneself regarding what they entail is really necessary for any kind of convivial relations between humans. Why? Simply because withholding information just breeds mistrust. It's just the most simplistic, banal kind of instinct. It's like holding a bone away from a dog, and it's not something that will be appreciated at any level, I believe. And there were forms, or rather, there still are forms of communication active which people use to be able to express themselves regarding what they do for a living, to share with sometimes complete strangers as to what this may be. Social media platforms are a great place for this, as I've mentioned earlier, forums. And when this becomes a practice which is encouraged by a society, we find that people are willing to offer to scrutiny what they do publicly more often than not. And usually, even if you believe that it's not something that you would want to be proud about, it allows someone else in a similar situation to see that, oh, well, oh, so and so is also here. And that creates a ground for a certain kind of understanding between people, a recognition that, okay, well, this is where we are, this is what's happening. It's often the kind of logic that's operational in any sort of small platform newsletter. So, for example, a long time ago, a bunch of teachers and students and me, we tried to map the working relations in an automobile auxiliary factory. Now, very often, the person who, for example, brings the steel rods into a furnace has nothing to do with the person who carries away the finished plates away. And yet, they are essential functions for that assembly to continue going on. And it really is possible, like, not just there. Like, for example, in a university, a student may really, apart from just the classroom, be disconnected from the lives that their professors live. And both these lives have certain sets of antagonisms. To be able to to be able to place these distinct lives, circumstances, aspirations, requirements on a common platform for a to begin with, maybe a locality to observe, becomes a way in which a certain kind of mutual understanding regarding each other's position becomes offered for scrutiny, to a place to reflect on, to understand that, well, yes, this is what is happening. And they may be able to connect some dots in their heads, thinking that, oh, okay, when someone raised that up as a problem, it might not have been just a freak occurrence. It might actually have some deep-seated underlying causes that are shared by a number of other people. It allows people to project a voice in places where they believed that they were had to be silent. And for any sense of civil society to operate, this is a essential, it's a crucial feature. I can't think of any conception of civil society that excludes this. And yet there are, I mean, you would have to take into consideration the limitations of this. I mean, let's not pretend like the platforms themselves, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth, they actually make money via the users that utilize such a platform to share information. You may say that this is well and good, as in it's fair and they should be allowed to do so. This is a sentiment that I share to a large extent. I share it because I do believe that they are offering a public service which is a good that is utilized by many. A lot of people find new relationships via Facebook. A lot of people find new jobs via Facebook. And other social media handles, Instagram, Twitter. They're also platforms which people use to advertise what they would like to. I, for example, have bought cookies from advertisements that I've clicked on Instagram. Uh, Yet, I guess at some point it's going to be, if people find that the only use that such platforms are put to once a certain kind of stagnation feeling out period is over. Let's say there's an initial buzz where everyone jumps onto a platform. Let's say it lasts for like 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 years, and then gradually people start, or rather people stop looking for connections amongst themselves, yet start trying to use that space as a form of passive income, like a front which they can use to posit a certain company, let's say cookies itself, and just use it as advertising space. At that point it becomes counterproductive to what some of the initial visions were when social media platforms were conceived. I guess that this can hold true for a number of forms of communication. I mean, initially when email started, we thought that, oh my god, this would replace the postal service. That it did, yes. But I guess now you have like affiliate marketing that takes place via emails. It becomes professionalized to the point where I guess in certain office circles, people simply stop even calling each other's names. They just know who that person is and what they are doing, and just like forward instructions and things of that nature. And there are a number of ways in which simple sociality of any kind of humane relation which does not entail an order or an instruction, withers away when the instrumentalization of communication becomes instated and sedimented into a platform. Uh, there are, of course, worse misuses of such platforms. You may have instances where a public personality may say something controversial, and a news channel may want to spin off it for the next week and a half. You may have even worse instances where a political personality decides to use a public platform to propagate hate against another community. We see this all the time against minorities in every part of the world, against immigrants and so on, against religious and sexual minorities. And there are means in place already, such as content moderators that do try and screen some of this. And I guess, like, even at the school level, you're always in some ways prodded, taught, filtered, edited from via your teachers regarding what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. And yet the only way in which anyone actually gets anywhere is via contesting the grounds in which that occurs. I mean, on what basis is something acceptable? Why is it unacceptable? And these are questions that will always remain in public scrutiny, in the sense that you would not be able to, for example, delimit why, for example, you may have the right for let's say a rental bicycle from your metro station to your college, and someone else would not. I mean, the only place where that becomes an exception is if you own that bicycle. Uh, so there's a sense in which these questions would require to be addressed, and the people who run platforms probably are thinking about it, yet are not yet, or rather are not incentivized enough to be able to intervene to reconfigure how these arrangements emerge. Now, from the little bit that I've seen, and I'm no historian of social media platforms, but I can imagine that there might be, for example, a buzz behind one such as Orkut or something, which might have preceded Facebook or might have arisen simultaneously, at least in India. And after a certain point where they see that a number of users are migrating to another one, they jump the ship and go on to that one, and so on and so forth. And I guess such a movement may continue until people have believed that they have exhausted what the advertising potential is on any given platform. And if that really is the strategy, that's a sorry state of affairs. And the only way to intervene in such a situation would be to break up the kinds of uses that people put such platforms to. And I think there would require to be some kind of fairly clear debate regarding what is acceptable, permissible, encourageable, and what is not. At some point, we see that it's impossible to uh, chart this debate in any way without bringing to bear what a division, as commonly understood, between public and private spaces are. What is it possible to do privately? What is it possible to do publicly? And there are very real limitations that people in different parts of the world would face here. For example, uh, as a relatively conservative country in terms of our public mores in India, we find that instances of the display of affection in public park are often frowned upon. There are even unfortunate cases where the police has been engaged, like active squads have been set up by the bureaucracy to disrupt and chase away couples. They even have names such as Romeo squads or anti Romeo squads. There may be people who want to point out to me that this happens only in certain regressive states like Uttar Pradesh. There may be a measure of truth there, yet I think once a precedent such as that is allowed to settle in, it will not hold well for any of the neighboring areas or as a practice in the same area. And unless it's confronted actively, unless it's actually taken up as a question of legislation, on what basis are these institutions empowered to do what they do, it will be allowed to uh, become some sort of norm, and that may become a restriction which will not really further any interests of freedom or self expression or even common rational debate, without which any sense of civility or governance really will break down to the point where you'll basically uh, accept a diktat given to you, not because uh, you'd like to, but because you have to. And when people start making decisions based on that criteria, it usually brings out the very worst in us. And it's not something that you would like to be able to, it's not something that you would want to encourage in any public space. That's what I think. Uh, so, who are the people who can actually take up such measures and where would they be addressed? I mean, if there are, for example, inhibitions that forums are finding, and I'm not saying all, there may be many forums that are actively taking up such issues. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the specialization of communication channels, groups, for instance. Something that a lot of young people, such as myself, have noticed, like at least on Facebook, is that once a lot of us started migrating to different cities in search for jobs and search for education, we came across like Flats Without Brokers. It's a public group which basically connects people who have access to a flat to someone who would like to rent it. And it completely does away with the whole system of brokerage, the middleman who perhaps used to know a neighborhood, perhaps used to know a few landlords there and would be able to ferry a student to a few of them and take a small fee for the uh, for showing the flats or whatever that was. I guess at some point, if your heart is bleeding out, you could think about, oh, what about the broker? Well, I think most of them are pretty much okay, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I personally know one or two. They've gone on to the tiffin business and stuff like that. Which is not to say that they'll go out of business entirely. There'll always be those people who would want to keep a broker or something close by to deal with their properties and things like that for whatever reason. Yet, as a tendency, I do see those developments, groups of that nature, being a progressive step, which has allowed people to connect with each other to address their requirements in very concrete means, which have provided for housing for a very, very large number of people. Uh, Steps of this nature, uh, it would really be of interest, even for the real estate industry, to be able to incentivize it. I mean, really, it actually, like, I've actually spoken with some of the old landlords in and around Kamla Nagar in the North Campus, which is perhaps just across the street from Hansraj College. And I was told that maybe, like, what, 15, 20 years ago, there might have been 3 or 4 people who would come to the neighborhood there looking for a place to stay. And I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but I was told that uh, since it was simply not a practice to charge any rent for a person seeking accommodation, especially someone young who's a student going to college and so on, they said that, okay, no issues, you can come and stay here for a while. And seriously, hearing that today seems miraculous, because it's really hard to get a place there. Like, you'd actually have to search quite a bit. And I'm not sure whether these are experiences which are still in place, whether the entire cycle must have been broken at some level when the institutions were shut down. Yet now that they are opening up, you can count on the fact that some of these would be at the number one priorities of parents, students, and of course landlords and tenants looking for these places. So there are n number of mediations that can occur, and this is not to say that someone should make an app on Google Play which someone can download, which will create yet another place which connects tenants and landlords and so on. Not to say that it's not already been done, but we would require to be able to uh, address these issues, drawing upon maybe case studies. Now, of course, case studies would be restricted to voluntary information that is provided by people such as you and me. And there are, you could say, limitations to that, yet I think it's a great place to start. Apart from which, there would be organizations who conduct surveys. I think Oxfam would be uh, snooping around these areas, and they may have some data. I recently came across a course on Coursera which looked very interesting. It was called Housing Justice, A View from Indian Cities. This is by the Indian Institute of Human Settlement. It's located in Bangalore. It seems like something that you may want to consider if any of these concerns appeal to you in any way. That aside, uh, if this is something that you'd like to think of on a slightly longer term basis, uh, you would very easily find good resources were you to maybe Google the housing question, and questions such as construction, maybe look up figures such as how many affordable uh, uh, housing complexes are being constructed by the government. Are there schemes that facilitate this? And maybe look at a number of the total number of migrants that come into a city at any given year. And it will give you a sense of the kinds of disparities already in place at a structural level, which will simply not be shaken up very easily. And I guess that's where the question of governance really does step in. I mean, would these housing complexes be subsidized? Who would subsidize them? Where would the funds come from? Of course, it's a tremendous infrastructural endeavor, and it would generate a degree of employment for uh, laborers around, as well as a demand for raw materials and things of that nature. And in that sense, it's something that any city would perhaps require, given the rate at which cities develop these days. And the worst case scenario here is to find that a certain scheme has been used to provide money to a group of builders who decide to make a bunch of low cost housing complexes, and find that there is a sea of people who are not in a position to foot the money for those buildings. And these are real predicaments. These are the nightmares that municipal organizations do come up against. And how successful they are at resolving these is really an open question. And I say open here with a degree of generosity, because the number of homeless in various countries is a starker number. I think in 2012 there might have been, I forget the years where it really peaked in India and things of that kind. But this is stuff that I would recommend that anyone looking into such affairs perhaps takes note of at some point whenever they want to make any kind of observation, intervention uh, in such matters. Anyway, on a slightly grim note, and having gone on a tangent from where we started, in a manner perhaps a little too rushed for comfort, I will say bye bye. And as usual, if you have any observations, any comments, criticism, or if you have information or resources that you know of, apart from the ones that I mentioned along these lines, I would welcome you to leave it as a comment below, so that other people, whoever finds themselves here, may also avail of your insights. And I will wrap that up. Good evening. Bye bye. Thank you for your time.